I talk a lot on this channel about how important outlining your memoir is. When we set out to write something so deeply personal as a memoir, we need some kind of scaffold to really keep us honest and make sure that we're telling the story that we want to tell. And recently, I had to put my money where my mouth is. I am starting a new book, and today I wanted to talk you through some of the observations I had as I was outlining my own memoir. Stay tuned. You've been writing your memoir, maybe even for years. You know your material, you know what it means. What's missing isn't the story, it's the structure. And that's why we started the Memoir Method Book Club. Every single month, Emily Thrash, a professional writer and editor, teaches you how to read like a writer by breaking down a published memoir and showing you what it's doing under the surface. Your first session is free. Head over to pageandpodium.com/book club to sign up. So what happens when the teacher becomes the student? Well, over the years, I have worked with dozens of women and men to get their memoirs out into the world to the people that need them. I have worked with people that had all kinds of goals, everything from just leaving their story to the next generation, regardless of whether it sold a single copy, all the way up to people who wanted to and became bestsellers, who built speaking careers, who built coaching businesses, who built something from their book that allowed them to live the life they want to live. And in fact, there is no coincidence that that is what my memoir is about. Now, I talk a lot about our message and our topic, so let me kind of just reveal what those are because I think it'll give you some context. The topic of my memoir is when I left academia to found what would eventually become Page and Podium. So it is taking me through the slice of life from the time that I really became integrated into the university system all the way until pretty recently, actually, as I was kind of thinking of how I wanted to bracket that journey. But the purpose of that memoir the topic is how I left academia to form my own business. Now, the message is a little bit more complex. The message is something that I really do want to speak to academics who are considering leaving. But again, as we talk about often on this channel, we do want our message to be a little bit broader of an umbrella. So the message I'm looking at for this book is that we all can find this place of fulfillment in our work. We just need to be willing to lean into the creativity. And with that message, I am hoping to bring in that secondary audience, not only academics who are wanting to leave, but people who feel really trapped and stuck and really like they're burning out because they don't have any kind of true purpose. They're really living by everybody else's rules. So the message I wanted to get across is you can embrace that creativity, that expression of yourself, and you can build that into your whole life. But it's a little scary and it takes some risks. So that is kind of my early way that I'm thinking about this manuscript. And when I decided that I really wanted to move into writing this book in earnest, not just talking about it, as I have been for several years now, transparently, I knew that it was such a good opportunity to test out our memoir method. Now, if you are new to this channel, you might not be familiar with that term. The Memoir Method is Page and Podium's trademarked system of moving all the way through the development of your memoir. Now, we have this laid out within our group coaching program as a step-by-step series of videos. A lot of them include worksheets and other types of training components. But the goal is to make the structuring of your memoir very, very clear. And what better opportunity to just test it and see if there were any bugs in the system than using my own memoir to work through those steps. So that is exactly what I did. Now, I'm not going to bore you with what those steps are here. We've got tons of videos on how to outline your memoir, on mistakes that people make outlining memoir. We have one specifically on inspirational memoir. Tons and tons and tons of work on what the outlining process actually looks like. You can either search YouTube, search our podcast app if that's what you're looking at, or on our blog, pageandpodium.com/blog. You will see that we have categories, everything from development to publishing to mindset, marketing, drafting. So you can sort through those. Outlining stuff's going to be under development. But for now, what I wanted to bring up were some of the experiences that I had as I went through this process. Because while I have worked with so many people on their memoir, I had not had the experience of going through the system myself. And I will tell you, knowing how the thing works is not the same thing as going through the process. When we go through the process, we've got all the personal stuff to untangle. We've got all the emotions to get through. So it was a really eye-opening experience for me, and a really good experience, actually. I really enjoyed it, and I really felt at the end, spoiler alert, I really felt once I had finished outlining that piece, I felt so powerful and energized. I really felt so good about the project, and I still do. So I wanted to share some of these things that I came across because it can be so helpful to know what to expect. And while I hadn't had these experiences, at least not all of them, myself before, a lot of them were not surprising to me because I have seen my clients go through them. So to kick us off, the first thing that I really felt came up kind of as I was going through this outlining journey was something that I talk a lot about on this channel. I talk a lot to the group. I talk a lot to all of my individual clients. And that is that I felt a real tension between writing for the market and writing for myself. Now, I knew that this was likely something that was going to come up. I have seen this in so many clients, and because really a part of the reason that I'm writing this book is I'd like it to supplement a piece of my speaking career that I'm trying to build out. I also knew that I needed to write for myself and then edit for that audience. Still, I did find that as I was going through the outlining process, I continually needed to rein myself back in and remind myself that this has to be my story. I have this one chance to get this story out in all of its nuance and complexity. And the more I was trying to universalize what I wanted to say, the less of the specifics of my own experience were going to fit in there and make sense and form a cohesive whole. So, this first tip, this first experience that I had can be such a useful reminder. When we are going into working on our memoir, it is very important that we know why we're writing that memoir and that we know for whom we are writing that memoir. But we cannot write it to their tastes because there simply is no stable goal to move toward when we think about it that way. Instead, we have to find that solid ground in ourselves. And that was one thing that I really had to push myself to trust myself on, to really know that if I wrote it from my heart, that there would be lots of things that people could connect with. So that's my first experience that I really did struggle a little bit with whether I was writing for myself or my audience. I did, of course, land on writing for myself, editing for my audience, but this is something that'll come up no matter how much of an expert you are. Okay, the second observation that I had as I was going through this process was that I really had to keep reminding myself of the message I was trying to get across. Now, one thing that I saw happen in myself, that I see happen in so many of my clients, was that as I was kind of going through the options of scenes, and particularly as I started to get closer to the present, as I mentioned, some scenes are quite close to the present. One thing that I noticed was I was really needing to lean on that message, even more than I thought, to decide which scenes belonged in and which scenes did not. As I was going through, I really tried to think about kind of how each chapter would serve that larger message. And oftentimes I felt kind of a little bit of tension in myself because I would see that I had a scene that seemed kind of really dramatic and interesting that I really thought would pull people in. But when I started to look at what the message of that scene was in my mind and what the message I was trying to get across in the book was, I often would find that they just weren't aligned. And as I pushed myself to use that message in the way we talk about a lot, both in the group and on this channel, one thing that I really found was that it became really clear to me which things needed to stay and which things really could not go. It was so helpful to have that framework for myself so that I didn't just feel like I was just taking shots in the dark. I really had a clear sense of how everything fit together. Okay, so that is the second thing, is I was leaning on that message. I do not have my message kind of fully formed and fully solidified, but I do know what kind of the key terms, the kind of key vibes are. And that was actually enough for me without even kind of solidifying that. I was kind of able to hold it in my mind. I will say mileage may vary. I've been doing this a long time, but that was how it ended up working for me. Okay, number 3, and this is something, by the way, that I see a lot because I am writing a memoir that has to do with my current life, that a lot of the things that are in the end of that memoir are things that currently exist. I found myself worrying about how the people in the memoir were going to react. Now, y'all are not surprised by this because it is something that comes up for almost every memoir writer that I have worked with. I hear about it from people that I didn't even work with on this channel, etc. And one thing that I think is I found kind of funny was that as I was writing, I really needed to incorporate Emily. Now, I talk about Emily a lot. Emily's kind of my right hand in the Memoir Method and at Page and Podium in general. And so I had recruited Emily to look over my outline once I was done with the draft. Now, we recommend this in our group program. I recommend this for anybody that is DIYing, that is writing their own memoir. So useful to get that outside feedback during the outlining phase. And I knew that I was going to have Emily take a look. Well, Emily's a character, y'all. Emily exists in the world of this memoir. Of course she does, because actually I was friends with Emily when I was an academic and then pulled her through to really help kind of be the right hand of the Memoir Method. So she is throughout that book. And one thing I really caught myself thinking is, okay, is this balanced enough? Am I being fair? And is she going to read this and feel kind of flattered, or is she going to read this and feel like it really is spot on? Is she going to read it and think I'm exaggerating? And I really had to quiet down those voices. As I have said many, many times on this channel, you cannot write to please other people. And I know this is a really important tip, because one of the things that I do find in common, particularly with the high-achieving women that we work with in the group, is that very often we are people pleasers. And when you're a people pleaser, one of the ways that that's inevitably going to come out is that you're going to want to write characters to be a little bit more favorable, so they come out a little bit more attractive, a little bit more enthusiastic, whatever it might be. Now, one thing that I thought was actually kind of funny about this situation in our case is that when we really got Page and Podium up and running, whenever I brought Emily on as a full-time hire, she really killed it. She's such a great asset to our company, and I really truly mean that. And what was funny is that I was writing a particular chapter description. So I was writing the description that we suggest you do for each chapter, a little 150 word blurb. And as I was writing that, I was like, you know what? Emily's killing it. Laura's killing it. And as I was writing that, I thought, I wonder if Emily's going to think that I'm just blowing smoke with that bit. I wasn't. It was authentic. It was an authentic thing that I wanted to share. But I think that's kind of unexpected. Usually we think we need to kind of build people up in our outline when we're doing that people-pleasy thing. In this case, rather, I felt like maybe I was kind of overinflating. But the takeaway that I want you to have here is that you don't need to tamp down or dial up anybody's personality, even if they're going to read it. The most important thing is that you are in tune with what you want to say about the things that they are doing. So them as a person, you can never get that on the page for better or for worse, right? They are a whole person. You are a whole person. You won't even be fully developed on the pages of your memoir, right? You're not going to develop somebody else. So that being the case, the thing that we need to keep in mind is we've got to be true to ourselves. Other people may or may not like the way that they're written. You are the one that has to stand behind it. So we need to make sure that we're catching that impulse. I felt good about catching it, although I will say Emily made a little LOL comment when she got to that part and kind of made a little note to just make sure that that was really authentically what I wanted to say. Okay, that is number 3. Now, as we move into the rest of this list, I really am starting to think a little bit more granularly, which is to say I'm really thinking about kind of at the summary level things that were happening. And the first of those, experience number 4, was that as I was writing my chapter summaries, only one of them ended up being in first person. Now, to back up just a little bit, as I'd kind of teased already, when we go through our chapter summaries, we ask everyone in the Memoir Method to write about 100 to 150 words, a description of each chapter. I like also, and we suggest that people do this, to put some bullet points underneath that chapter summary just to remind yourself. Those don't have to be fancy or anything. But the main thing is to get that paragraph summary. Now, we suggest that people write their paragraph summaries in third person. And the reason is, with memoir, we are necessarily so close to it because it's our life. And what that means is, when we are trying to outline it, we really need some techniques to be able to get a little bit of distance. Well, a very simple technique to accomplish this is to write in third person. So rather than saying, I started at the university, I would say, Amanda started at the university. Now, one thing that I have seen happen, not for everybody, but I'll see this once in a while with one-on-one clients and our group members, is that there'll just be that one chapter description or even sometimes just one sentence that's written in first person. And this happened to me. And wouldn't you know, when I went back to look, when I noticed that I had done that one summary in first person, I knew immediately why. And that was that particular scene was really personal. It was really emotional to me. By the way, that scene actually didn't even end up making it into the final outline. It was something that was kind of about a relationship that I was experiencing as I was going through this process. But when I held it up to compare it to my topic and message, didn't make it. Still, the point that I want to make here is that when you are going through writing your memoir, there will be things like that. There will be points at which particularly kind of emotional, we might call trigger, and sometimes they are triggering things, will pop up, that there are going to be kind of emotional surprises. And one of the ways that that can show up, and I just think this is kind of interesting to think about how our brains work. One of the ways that that can show up is by that random first person summary. Okay, so that's number 4. The 5th experience that I want to share, and I'm going to be pretty vulnerable here. When I left the academy, it was not all on good terms. There were many people that I loved and still love that I met from my time in the academy, so it was not all bad. But there were some experiences that I had with folks in my department and outside of my department that were really negative experiences. And I needed to include them, not only because those were things that drove me to explore other options besides academia, which of course led me to founding this company, but also because those things were true to my experience. Those were things that shaped how I understood the world. And as a result, those were things that directly fed into both the topic and the message. So, there were some negative experiences, of course, that I needed to put in there. What did surprise me, because it's been a long time since those negative experiences happened, and it surprised me how vengeful I would find myself getting. And particularly as I was kind of going through that outline and I was thinking about what to include and what not to include, one thing that I really needed to do was pause and evaluate and make sure that I was putting things in the book because of me and not because I was trying to get revenge on somebody else. Now, this is not my most favorite part of myself, but I do think it's human. All of us, when we feel that we have been, victimized by somebody or wronged by somebody or cheated or something was unfair, we do have an impulse to try to look for justice, right? We do have an impulse to try to set things right. But the main takeaway here, you are not going to set things right in your memoir. You won't. At the very best scenario, you write these bad things and they help inspire somebody else to be better, but you will not ever set the tables balanced through your memoir. So what do? We've got to write it for ourselves. We've got to write it from our own perspective. And any trace of that feeling of vengeance, of wanting to get somebody, you've got to pay close attention to that and figure out how you can work through it, because it will be poison to your memoir if you bring that vengeful spirit in. Okay. So the next thing that I learned as I was going through this process, and this is observation number 6, and that is that as I was looking through the finished outline, I could see very, very clearly that there were some chapters that if I tried to write them with just what I had there, it was going to be really thin. Now, this is something that you pick up, of course, after writing many books. You have a sense really of how much meat you need. So my point isn't kind of keep an eye on that, although do as best you can. But the point that I want to make here is that as you're kind of going through, when you notice that some of those chapters are thin, you actually still have a choice. One side of that decision-making coin flip is that you can really get back into your development, think about whether you need to add a little more meat, a little more heft. Sometimes that's in the bullet points I mentioned that come under the summary. Just give yourself a few more things to talk about. The other option, and the option that I took, admittedly as a more advanced writer, the option that I took was to just kind of put a pin in it. I knew where I needed the story to go, and I also suspected, and as it turned out, I was right, that as I went through the early chapters, I probably would have a little too much, which gave me kind of the flexibility to, as I was writing, kind of bank some of those things that I thought would go in an earlier chapter into some of the later chapters that felt a little thin. So that is a perfectly normal thing. You will have chapters on your outline that are both too thin and too thick. And oftentimes you're just going to have to decide whether really in your gut, honestly with yourself, you believe you can go ahead and start writing and solve the problem later. Or, especially if this is your first time writing a book, it's often worth digging back in a little bit and trying to set yourself up a little bit more for what you're trying to do. Okay, now this last little set of takeaways, these are all kind of bigger picture stuff. And I really wanted to share these with you because I think they really speak to how powerful this planning process is. Now, the first thing I want to share with you is I loved that as I was going through these chapter summaries, it was so clear to me the things that really I had pretty much fully healed from, the things that did not hurt anymore, that I could really see with some distance. I could really look at them and say, I'm okay from that. I learned something from it. That person was a real jerk, but I am okay. I survived that. And there were parts of that outline where I didn't feel that way. There were parts of that outline where I was like, oh man, that still feels really immediate. And even just having to kind of stir it up enough to write about it, it got me a little bit dysregulated. So as you are going through, just keep in mind that memoir is such a powerful measurement of your own healing. I've said before, and I think this is so crucially important, there is no point where you are healed enough to write your memoir. If that's something you're waiting for, it is not coming. It's not a thing. All of us are healing our entire lives. And it's a linear, ongoing thing, not a contained experience. And what that means is that memoir can be so powerful as a way to really see where you are. You'll see this when you outline, you'll see this. It was not subtle to me. So I think that was such an important takeaway for me because this had been such a painful part of my life. And I'd wanted to write the book for a while. I kind of decided I was ready for it, but I really was not sure how kind of immediate some of these things would feel. They felt really good for the most part. And then I was able to kind of see the parts that would be a little harder when I got to writing that part in the actual book. Okay, the next point that I want to give you as a takeaway just speaks to the power of structure. Now, in our Memoir Method group, we have a very clear step-by-step delineated way forward to define what your structure is. We take you through your topic and your message. We take you through getting everything dumped out on paper. We take you through structuring it kind of loosely around the key turns in a narrative. And then, of course, we are culminating with that development stage in the process that I literally went through, the process of getting that outline done. But one thing that was so interesting to me, I have a couple different memoirs that I'm thinking of writing, and this was the one I had decided to start with. But as I really got into plotting out where each of those kind of major turns would happen, one thing that I noticed was that I kind of had 2 or 3 memoirs in there kind of competing with each other. And while the message and the topic are really good bumper cars, really good kind of guardrails against going off of the rails in your memoir, there still was a temptation to pull some of the things in that I know actually don't belong in this memoir. They belong in another memoir. So one of those, for example, I mentioned earlier, there was a relationship that I was in for a lot of the time of this memoir. And I was really kind of on the fence about how much of that relationship I wanted to include in this book. Well, as I started to look at where the different turning points fell, where those steps that we teach to make sure your narrative structure works, as I started to look at where those fell, it was actually very, very obvious to me that I had multiple stories in there. And the reason is, when you are looking at things in terms of these structured points of change, sometimes we call these pinch points, sometimes we call these plot points, but the point at which you as the protagonist make a change of some kind, what I could see was that those were all different. And when I laid them out and I could see that the turns were in different domains of my life, so my home, my personal relationship with family and friends, my romantic relationship, my professional life, each of those had a turn. Well, when I really look honestly at my topic and my message, it's pretty clear to me that that shouldn't be the case. It's pretty clear to me that this is a cohesive story. Well, leaning on that structure, leaning on what we know to be true of a successful narrative arc, it became so clear to me how to edit that to make sure I had a cohesive manuscript. And I think that is powerful. So if you have been kind of struggling with how to figure out how to get your whole life into one book, let me just say, structure is the answer. I know I'm a broken record. I don't care. Structure is the answer. Okay, the next experience that I had, the next thing that I learned from doing this process was, even though I have done dozens of these outlines for other people, somehow it still really surprised me how long it took me to outline my memoir. Now, again, I have a lot of experience at this, and the process of the outlining, not including the brainstorming of what all I wanted to include, only including getting this into an outline form, took me about 10 hours all told. Now, I did a big chunk of that kind of at the very beginning just to kind of kickstart things, and then I poked at it a little along the way, so this wasn't 10 hours of sitting at the computer. But it did take me a long time, and toward the end, I did start to get, I confess, a little bit frustrated with how long it was taking. So this is something that I really want you to keep in mind. We have this conversation a lot, actually, in our group program, where I often try to caution people, you cannot rush the development stage. Development does often take a couple of months, but as one of our members pointed out to me last week, sometimes development takes way more than 2 months. And the reason is, development is the heavy lift. Getting that outline together, that is the heavy lift. Once we've got that down, we are ready to go. We are slowing down to speed up. And that brings me to my last observation, which is, when I finished that outline, I felt like Superwoman. I have never felt so energized and excited to start a project as I did when I finished that outline. Now, let me put a grain of salt here, because every time I've done an outline, I felt like that. But because this was such a new project, seeing all of that promise, seeing that I really was doing this thing, oh my gosh, it was so inspiring. I was so ready to get started. And that, I think, is one of the amazing parts about doing this development strategy that we teach, of moving through your message and your topic, figuring out your key turning points, putting this into a skeleton and then an external outline. This process that we teach in our group program, I believed in it before. Now I am so hooked on it. It was so useful to have that scaffold for me. And when I got done, I knew that I could do this book. I had no hesitation. And you know what? To be a little vulnerable, I'm a professional writer. I wasn't always sure that I was going to be able to write this book. Some books are really hard for emotional reasons, for practical logistical reasons, for all the reasons. But once I finished that outline, I knew that I could do it. And I knew that I had to do it. I could see the value of that work in a way that I hadn't before. Okay, well, I hope this has been helpful to kind of get an inside experience of what it is like to put that outline together, and particularly on a project that is so important to you. This project is really my heart. It really is kind of the entire way that I see the world at this moment. We're talking about things in there like creative expression, like personal freedom, like letting go of things like people pleasing and perfectionism. It is my whole heart. And I am so grateful that I was able to take that time, put that outline together so that I could really feel that kickstart of excitement to get the project going. Okay, if I can help you get to this place, because oh my gosh, it's so pretty here, come join me. please let me know. I would love to meet with you. Make sure that you will get something out of our programs. We can talk about what the best fit might be, whether that's group coaching, one-on-one coaching, ghostwriting, publishing, or something different. And we can figure out how to get you from where you are right now to where you want to be with this incredible book. In the meantime, I hope that you will keep pushing forward with the outlining process, even though it's not always that fun. I can testify to that. Keep going, you've got this, and until then, happy writing.
You know that feeling when a book just hits you? Not because the story is wild, but because it's shaped so intentionally that it almost makes you rethink your own story. You finish that last page and think, how did they do that? The structure, the honesty, the clarity. There's something under the surface that you just can't put your finger on. And the reason is, unless someone shows you how memoirs actually work, it's hard to translate that inspiration into your own writing. And that's exactly why we created the Memoir Method Monthly Book Club. If you want to join Emily Thrash every single month to dig into an exemplary memoir and figure out what's happening under the surface, head over to pageandpodium.com/book club. Your first month is free, and we can't wait to welcome you to the group.